So now you got to ask yourself, are we only making political and economic decisions when it comes to voting processes of the presidents, or are we doing that in our everyday life? Are we doing that when it comes to who we shop with, who we sleep with, who we align ourselves with, who we partner with? Otherwise, we being hypocrites, ain't we? Or does that not matter? It don't matter if we empower somebody economically or financially that doesn't believe and have the same values as us, but just don't put them in political position. But how is that so when they get economically financed, they use their economics to put others in political position? So you realize there's a funnel process of our talent and our spirit that they manage, they bottle up, they product, right? And then they get paid from. And then they take that money that they get paid from, then they put people into office and political position to oppress us. So your very magic is being used as a funnel to keep you down. It's always deeper than rap. It wasn't just our parents that dropped the ball. Our parents were fighters. Growing up in the 60s and the 70s, it was a different kind of fight. Don't dare disrespect your parents and generations that come before you. Each generation had to go through a different type of fight. And everybody didn't know everything. Sure, there was many that were fooled, that were drugged, that were thrown into these political movements. If we look at the 70s were a time where, and this is the thing, when people go look back at the 70s and they say, wait a minute now, we had this effeminization going on in the 70s, the way men dress and things of that nature. Oh, you point to that as a powerful time in Black American history because there was a wave of European influence that came over Black America, and there was a high dosage use of psychedelic drugs being pushed upon us, and we were going, it was a fight to stop all of the Afrocentricity that was happening in the militarization of the political movement in the 60s. And then they poison us with crack. Then we go into over-sexualization and hyperalization of culture. Then we go into the digital age. And now we're here in 2024 acting like these things are not byproducts of decades of poison, not a generation. It's been happening for a while. So we have to stop using the past as an excuse for our present, because the goal is to evolve past the past. So the focus will always be the vision for the future, which we're going to be focused putting that together on what is the plan for 2044. You know, I was taught, and I had a conversation, sit down with my brother, Dr. Wesley. He's talking about how, you know, the ascended masters, the scientists of the world of old would sit down and counsel about the direction of the planet for the next 25,000 years. And we was like, yo, thinking about planning for 25,000 years, you have to plan differently. You would have to plan in like ages. You would have to plan, you know, with the cosmos. It wouldn't be a political plan. It wouldn't be none of that. It'd be a cosmic plan, because people would have to then, and this is what they did, they would have to look towards, you know, the different ages that we will go into and how that would affect DNA and how that would affect, right, the evolution of human beings. And we slow that down. You go look at governments and scientists, and they start talking about things that's going to happen millions of years out. And then we start talking about, you know, how they have plans for hundreds of years, for the next 100 years. Like we having a conversation crying about what's going to happen for the first 100 days of 2025, which is a very small glimpse, relatively, if we thinking farther out. And the farther we think out, the bigger the vision becomes, because the more time we have to make something possible. So the goal would be first to think about at least 19 years out, right? Because that does follow a metonic cycle. And when you do that, you give yourself enough time, you know, to have a vision that's broad enough to change the world. And when you think about family, you start thinking about generations, and your decisions change, and what important to you changes, your values change because it becomes less about you and what you can do for others. So then we focus on creating a generation of trust fund babies. How do we make sure that there's at least, let's start with 1 million families with trust set up so that their assets, because if we creating movements of financial literacy that's supposed to lead to economic upliftment, right, then we want to make sure that the assets that they leave behind are going to probate court to where the families are divided and fighting over it. So then the focus become things like high level wealth club, which we focusing on, right? To be able to create trust, develop family banking plans, insurance guides, right? And that family to be skilled and represent different industries. That family then also focus on obtaining a particular type of knowledge, and the knowledge that that family houses and holds connected to that last name is passed down to the next generation, and they evolve upon that knowledge. So now these families become institutions that work over time. Father lives 70, 80, 90 years, depending on if we get the health right. Then he has a child. And so just by father to son, right, that's 180 years of planning or 140 years of planning. Just from father to son. And then that one has a child and a son and nieces and nephews. And so if you want to talk planning over time, and this is why they focus on bloodline planning, which goes into the science of mating and family. And when we go into the science of mating and family, it becomes not romanticism, Roman antics about why we get into and how we feel bubbly about the love of a relationship, right? But about how we can plan over time, whether our DNAs are good, whether our family is good, whether our businesses should combine together, whether we can establish partnership, whether we have rites of passage or values that we agree with. And that starts with first self, because if the mind is right and you have a clear mind and you have what we consider to be a psychologically whole mind, and this is what we ultimately get down with, right? Psychological wholeness, because we have a broken generation that is not psychologically whole. Right? So we're missing too many pieces as a society, as a collective, but as individuals. Right? So as an individual, we focus on psychological wholeness, mental, spiritual, financial development, but focus on the tier of mental, right, and spiritual development. Now you have a woman that has that same spiritual and psychological wholeness. Now these two, and especially with the advent of technology now, we can even check to whether they're going to have smart children if we want to get deep. We could check different traits and things of that nature. But more importantly than that, those families then come together and those families have conversations, right? To where we're talking about, whether this is going to be a good mating and a good pairing for generations to come. My son, if I have a son, right, or I got a daughter, and I'm thinking about how if you got a son and a daughter, y'all got certain wealth in industry, or maybe y'all have a family of power over here and we got power over here, and we say, okay, let's connect these together, and now we move as a unit. So I think it's important that we think of these things, because this gets into future planning and control of the future. We got to get it together. We got to get it together. It's bad. And I want to see us with high-level thinking, high-level psychological wholeness, to where we are full within ourselves and we know how to operate in the world at a high level